Well, welcome everyone here at this webinar. For those of you who are live and those of you who are watching it at a later time, perhaps at your convenience. This is part of an ongoing series that the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Mid-America proudly presents regarding how to reach and how to minister to and how to care for older adults. And our last webinar was on older adult women and due time, right? Older adult men. And Jan Airy is our consultant in the Mid-America region for older adult ministries, and she'll be happy to tell you where to find other resources as we begin our introduction. So go ahead, Jan.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I'm very happy to be here today too, and to welcome you as well. As Paul mentioned, I'm the coordinator for this ministry for our region, which has been in existence now for 6 years. We have support from the NBA, National Benevolent Association, and it has allowed us to keep on growing. And so a part of the time during the pandemic made us, or pushed us, I would say, as many others, to offering things virtually. And we've found great success with reaching a broader audience. And now we are expecting that we reach people all across the country and potentially anywhere in the world. So this is very exciting for us and hopefully for you too. And you'll hear more from me, but I am really support staff in a way to Paul and Alex as they make their presentation after I do a brief introduction in a couple of minutes. So welcome again.
Well, welcome. I always forget to introduce myself, but I am Paul Koch. I'm co-regional minister of the Christian Church in Mid-America, and I don't know how to introduce Alex because it'll come with some tears. But Alex, will you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Paul. I'm in a season of transition. My title that will stay in even through my series transition for this evening is I'm the Associate Director of Disciples Men. So I work for Disciples Home Missions alongside Greg Alexander, who is our Director of Disciples Men. And we are engaged in trying to create and nurture groups within the Christian Church Disciples of Christ where men can come together and be uplifted and mature as men and as followers of Jesus. I also serve currently as the pastor of Marshfield Christian Church, which is in Southwest Missouri. And I am going to be in that role for about another 6 weeks, 7 weeks, something like that. Beginning in November 1st, I've just received a call to be the Associate Regional Minister for Transformation in Illinois and Wisconsin. And I will be moving to take that position at the beginning of November and still continue to do my work with Disciples Men. Looking forward to that. I'll be a little bit closer to Indianapolis, which will make being at the home office a little bit easier, and be a little bit closer to my partner in Disciples Men, Greg Alexander, as well.
Right. Well, welcome everyone again tonight, and a special welcome to Eric and Jack. They are two of my Illumin brothers, and a lot of what I know comes from being around those guys, learning from their wisdom and the collective network of spirituality that's definitely without walls, and reaching people where they are, and honoring every person's tradition as an entree to a greater love and to a greater awareness. So I appreciate you two guys being on, and we'll get right with our presentation here tonight. I'm going to share the screen, and Jan will begin for us.
Yes, thank you, Paul.
Some of her work, right?
So as you're viewing this title screen, you'll see that we had a kind of long title, but I think some wonderful meaning and tongue-in-cheek to it. And our next slide does name the three of us who have just introduced ourselves. So you'll see the spellings of our name if you're wondering what they are. But moving to the third slide, Paul, my role today is to talk with you a little bit at this beginning of the webinar about the context for aging that may supply some information about the spirituality of aging in men in particular. So I'm going to offer some examples to you with just a brief segment of time before we work into more depth in our topic. So you'll see that these four statements here are probably commonly known and fairly familiar to you. But the first one, that our culture dictates to people that should be strong and stoic, and men in particular, ends up being kind of a stumbling block for men who then, as they grow older, have a harder time facing some of the things they need to let go of, like a role with retirement, perhaps the loss of a spouse, as well as even admitting some of the limitations that they're experiencing in their bodies. So science is working to study these aspects now and to see what some contributing factors might be to aid men in our culture with finding aging to be a little bit easier. One of the things for good news is that men literally do have tougher skin. That's a sort of a saying, 25% tougher, in fact, than women. And men are blessed with having more moisture pores on their skin, which keeps them from looking their age a bit longer. We know that men are happier when they're older. This is also true of women, happier than their younger cohorts. And the reason for that, we're not always sure, but we think is because life has taught us some lessons as we've grown older, and we become happier because we've learned some things, and we may be feeling a little bit less stressed about life and what it has to offer to us. I want to tell you about brain aging for a minute. I found it interesting to know that the brain of women and men ages differently. One example is that for cognitive impairment, which of course not every older person has, but it's a big concern for all of us. What causes it for men most times is some physical attributes, things going on in their body, like being overweight, perhaps, being diabetic, or having had a stroke causes that cognitive impairment. But that's very different for women. In women, cognitive impairment is most often caused by being dependent on other people for day-to-day living, or feeling as though they have less to say about their life and a smaller network of friends. We know, I think, that fairly commonly that the life expectancy is about 5 years different, less for men than women. But I'm not sure if you are aware that this is a worldwide phenomenon and that there is no reason truly known yet for that. And it's another thing that's being studied actively now. There could be many reasons for that. So on the next slide, Paul, we'll show you the photograph of a man who has just turned 100 years old. So the question is, what are some models besides this wonderful photograph of this man who's 100 that can be found for growing old and being male? And the answer so far is that there isn't one. The best known research about aging and elders and men by Edward Thompson says there is no prototype that can be followed. It's non-existent, which again kind of proposes a little bit of a stumbling block for men when it comes to aging. With women, the experience that women have had over their lifetime before they've grown to be old has helped them in some ways to deal with aging better. Namely, they are thought to be caregivers often. And older women have had some experience with being vulnerable through illness or just through society's dictation to them. So some of this is a little bit of an aid in growing older for women than men. But not all is lost. For men who reach 100 years of age, the reason they've reached that age, most likely, they say, is that they have easily avoided the most serious illnesses that there are in older age. For women, it's different. Women who've reached 100 most often have navigated a serious illness and have found a way to survive it. So again, just some of the differences. On our next slide, Paul, when we step into the second half of life, we can start to think of Richard Rohr and many of the things I'm assuming a lot of you have read about. One of the challenges that he names in the second half of life is to figure out how we take that journey, which helps us to become more connected and attached to the deeper elements, the spiritual elements of life and our reasons for being. He described in an interview how the first half of our life, before aging into elderhood, is many times to create the container for who we are in a symbolic sense, the container that holds all of the elements of who we are. But in that second half, when we begin to journey, not just men, but women too, into elderhood, then we need to find what elements are going to fill that container, which aspects of who we are going to supply the container with materials that's there. He also talks about how important it is to have stories, to share stories. Again, this is a little bit harder for men, but it's a good practice that we can all work on, hearing each other's stories and practicing listening to them. There is so much evidence that finding our way spiritually in the second half of life is a key component to who we are in growing older. And not just Richard Rohr writes about this, but others do as well. It is true that in old age, we tend to lean more into spirituality, to become more interested in it if we have not even grown up in the spiritual realm of a religious community. And in this sense, there is more searching that goes on and also great potential, I say, for evangelism in our congregations because of that interest in old age. But statistically, with spirituality, we know a few things. These are found in the Pew Research report that came out just about 2-3 years ago now, saying that for women and men who are over 65, the percentage of women who say that they are involved in their worshiping community, that they attend worship on a regular basis, meaning at least twice a month, that they pray on a regular basis, meaning daily, and that they believe in a God and practice studying is about 60% of the women. It's 40% for men. So it's about a 60-40 ratio in all three of those categories. But that is changing too, because now there are studies that show that we can find men as well as women live longer, find greater happiness, and feel more satisfied and successful through their spiritual journey and through learning about their own faith and growing in that faith, which then allows them to extend their life significantly. Usually, if we look at statistics again, 6 to 7 years. To me, that's an amazing number. So I want to leave you now to invite Paul and Alex to talk about this spiritual journey.
Oh, thank you, Jane. I just found that incredibly fascinating and so affirming that we speak the same language from many approaches. Yours is a gerontologist and certainly a person of faith, but mine as a spiritual director and kind of a church administrator in some aspects. And that's what I find about so incredible about this work is that no matter what core source you go to, whether ancient mystics or 20th century psychologists, psychiatrists, or theologians, and then contemporary authors today, I think we're all on the same page. And I think you may have answered the question of why people 65 and older are happier than those 60 and younger. It's claiming the gift of the second half of life. And just a reminder, we're not talking chronological life, like when you reach 35, 38, or 40, maybe 45 or 50, but when you have spiritually entered into a realm of elderhood and claiming your wisdom. And I'll talk more about that here in this presentation. Begin with a quote from Joseph Campbell. He says, "We have not even to risk the adventure alone, for the heroes of all time have gone before us. The labyrinth is thoroughly known. We only have to follow the thread of the hero path, and here it is. And where we had thought to find an abomination, we shall find God. And where we had thought to slay another, we shall slay ourselves. And where we had thought to travel outward, we shall come to the center of our own existence. Where we had thought to be alone, we shall be with all the world." And that's Joseph Campbell, who was a forebear in this third wave of feminism, third wave of the male response, as we might categorize it, which is a very healthy. It's about time. We took a long journey of 150 years, I think, to reach this point. And so Joseph Campbell, Robert Bly, Richard Rohr, as you mentioned, have been wonderful shepherds. This was from a quote of A Gathering of Men, and that's an interview with Bill Moyers that he did with Joseph Campbell. And there was a part in that presentation that really stayed with me. He was saying, society doesn't honor our men elders, our male elders. And he talked about the power of one time, says where a congregation says, "Hey, anyone who's 65 and older, will you stand up so we can thank you for your wisdom and for your mentoring and for your contributions?" And you can imagine just how delighted the whole congregation would be to do that. But at this program, they did the same thing. They invited all men 65 and older to come sit on the front row, and the younger men gladly relinquished their seats and moved back. But the tears of the older men who finally, perhaps for the first time in their life, been recognized just for who they are as a wisdom elder, and the tears of the younger men so proud to be in their company. Joseph Campbell's work it largely centers on what is called the hero's journey, and this is very abbreviated graph. There's a lot more technical ones, but you can see that it's consistent with the call to adventure that leaves someone to move from their armchair or from really the first half of their life out of their container, and then enter the world of the unknown, which has challenges and temptations and suffering a death or a time in the wilderness, but that is necessary to be transformed. And then they can also realize, what needs to emerge from them that is healthier and seek greater relationship with the community. And then they return to where they began. And find that this pattern is true in all the great hero epics. You can take your favorite. This is the Odyssey that's kind of mapped here, but the same thing for Star Wars. George Lucas had a copy of the hero's journey right beside him when he mapped out those trilogies. And Wizard of Oz, Lord of the Rings, Braveheart, Spartacus, Les Miserables, you can name it. This is what Richard developed that's in his book, From Wild Man to Wise Men. And I'll spend a little more time. I know all charts are complicated, but you can see it's kind of an arc, if you will. Here's the heroic journey. Here the man is leaving home, and he has experience of initiation to cause him to want to leave out to a greater journey. But there are dangerous off-ramps, and I can't underscore enough that how dangerous they are, that a young man could exit off and realize it's the young fool, the rebel without a cause, who dies a premature death, perhaps through recklessness or hopelessness. Uh, but the hero continues, and then become awareness of self-identity, kind of what is false about him, what was just a show, what was just part to please society, but what might be emerging as the true self, kind of an age of wonder. But usually around that time, there becomes a crisis. And it's not that we will it or God provided it or we were destined for it. It just happens. Crisis happens, and usually around the middle age. Sometimes it's career uncertainty, marital difficulties, illness that comes, problems with children, if you will. There's something that really shakes us up, and that is at the apex of our journey there. But there comes time when you realize, as we continue on, that you can be thankful for that crisis because it was necessary suffering to have you emerge. Then here becomes what is the sacred descent or the wisdom journey, letting go of what you no longer need, what no longer serves you, allowing your tower or your container to be broken, to let your light shine through. But again, there's more off ramps, particularly as we talk about older men. One can become an old fool, realizing that their identity, that they liked what was false about themselves, or even after crisis, become embittered about that and started blaming everybody in the book. And we certainly see plenty of examples for that today. But as you begin your holy descent of gradually letting go, this is the entree to the last stage of the holy fool or the sage. And my friends know I always describe it as when you see me skipping down the sidewalk on the street, whistling a happy tune in my bathrobe, you'll know I think I've arrived. At least I know I've arrived. But there's a wonderful man named Rob Jones from Australia who has modified it, Richard's model, and it's right up here with this escape bubble. Sometimes we can be ambivalent to all of this and just kind of living in a little happy world. And there is a caution with that sometimes this world that shuts out real problems, real people, real opportunity could be the church. And as I think good disciples say, the church needs to be involved in the world where the human need is, where the hurt, where there's action. Let's not be in the escape bubble. All those complicated charts and ways can be simplified on this little drawing here. Isn't it true? This is our plan of when we set off in life, and this is, I think, what God's plan is. Will we ever arrive? But God, thank goodness, God's plan is often where we are. We have a lot of guideposts along the way, and we can begin clear at the beginning, really, of our desert fathers, desert mothers, mystics of the Middle Ages, and they provided poetry and writings, which especially we Protestants, need to return to and to understand. And as reading those writings of people who lived in times of great difficulty, we could see their journey, but what is our hero's journey? And what is revealed in our unknown realm, and where is our departure and our initiation and our route and our return? My favorite, Julian of Norwich, writes, first the fall and then the recovery from the fall, both are the mercy of God. In this proverb, a young man who cannot cry is savage, an old man who cannot laugh is a fool. This African proverb, a young man who is not embraced by the village will burn it down just to feel the heat. And we see that acted in modern day villages today, don't we? What can intervene? The mentors, are the elders to let the young man be embraced. So that's a part of his community. Hildegard of Bingen, you understand so little of what is around you because you do not use what is within you. All the power to transform is within us. It takes our elders to reveal that for us. Certainly grounded in scripture, Isaiah 8:14, God is both your sanctuary and your stumbling stone. God doesn't will tragedy, but God can certainly use tragedy to help us arrive at the point that we need to be. So many of the patriarchal stories that we have, this is from Jacob, one of my favorite passages. I am with you and will keep you where you go and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. Then Jacob woke up from his sleep and said, well, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And there begins his journey of discovery. Matthew 16, Jesus says, if any who welcomes my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross, and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Indeed, that selfless interaction of being part of a community. And then you see, I noticed I went to a kind of a medieval or Renaissance script, parable of Luke 15. Certainly, we know it is the prodigal son. And I want to call your attention to this wonderful painting by Rembrandt of the prodigal son. We could spend our whole time gazing at that, but you can see the loving father taking back the son who was just dining, sleeping with the pigs for a while, and his brother who doesn't quite know what to make of it, and some onlookers. But I invite you to find that painting sometime and to study it and realize what images strike you. And look particularly at the loving father's hands and how are they different? And there they are. Wouldn't you say maybe that they are hands of two different people, two hand models were used by Rembrandt? And notice the hand of the strong right arm, it gently caresses his son's back, but the hand of the understood spiritual left arm firmly guides his shoulder. Isn't that a reverse, where the strong and might is not used for correction or reproof, but for love, and the spiritual hand is the one that provides now the direction. What an incredible, beautiful paradox. And perhaps he used two different models to emphasize that point. And to question for your own reflection, when have you experienced firm but loving touch? And the last aspect that I will begin with in terms of the teaching is realizing that, particularly with Carl Jung, but it goes clear back to Socrates, who recognized that people are different. There are four basic archetypes that call us along our journey. And you can see they are king, warrior, magician, and lover. And people who have studied it, particularly Moore and Gillette, kind of diagram that as a pyramid. Where the apex at the top, just a fine little point is the unity of all those archetypes, but it's a long wall on each side to climb to get there, and the base is very far apart. And at that base, it's where you can find your shadows of negative aspects of those archetypes. And Bill Plotkin describes shadows are a part of us deep within that we are afraid to name or to confront. And that is really a new definition of sin, if you will. It used to be sin. Oh, don't do that. There's good and evil and there's right or wrong and all that. But no, sin might be looked as that is within us that we are afraid to name or to emerge. And so we operate out of those shadows. And this is just an example. Here's the one side of the pyramid. There's the king in his fullness, but he might act as a tyrant. For his shadows, just a butcher, just an evil lord, or a weakling, an ineffective king who cannot command and lets forces of disintegration occur. You can see positive and negative. Each archetype has a positive and negative shadow. And again, more than we can study right here. But again, we'll provide these resources if you want. But imagine this is a pyramid at the top, and indeed that reaches maturity. And there's even immature archetypes, not even reach the level of being positive or negative as a mature archetype, but still in its infancy. And then now takeaways. This is salute to Dick Ham, who realized that our quest as disciples are to live in true community, have deep Christian spirituality, and a passion for justice. And I submit, I believe men are hungry for all of these especially, and does our congregations and do our communities provide this? Men are hungry for true community, Matthew 7:9 says, which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Are you giving your father's sons, friends, and others pebbles instead of the bread of life? Give them the whole bread, the whole loaf, not just a little small corner of communion, you might say. And how to do that is encourage all those around you to participate in regional men's retreats or possibly plan your own, and supplement quarterly or monthly civic club style men's church breakfasts with weekly sharing or counsel circles of deep emotional sharing and vulnerability, and strategize how to reach men not in your own congregation or in your circles, perhaps not even thinking about meeting in congregations or places that might be foreign to those you want to reach. Perhaps meet in a deli after hours, ones that are just open for lunch. I've had that experience where the owner of the deli gladly gave me his key, and we met there for many years. Men are hungry for deep Christian spirituality, and when you gather men in weekly circles, don't be afraid to provide deep substance with Bible studies, themes, challenging film clips. If you want to use multimedia, personal sharing, live your faith on the golf course or in the locker room, at work. People will notice, honestly. They will seek you out. You don't even have to come up with 5 ways to influence others. They will find you. They will notice that there's a light because, as we said, men are hungry to connect with someone like you. And seriously, they will. Men have a hunger and passion for justice. We call this side-by-side evangelism, sharing your heart, soul, strength, and might with a potential brother in a most respectful, unobtrusive way by working alongside each other on a mission project. That's my definition. But men love to work with their hands, and you don't even have to sit face to face. Being side by side will have wonderful sharing, motivating hands-on, project-oriented, and other non-pew men to show up, rise up, and share what they enjoy most, and thus meet Christ through you in shared mission work. Third part of the definition, while sawing, hammering, digging, intentionally taking a break and promising to share 3 things your brother might not know about you while you're doing all those things, can open up worlds. Agreeing to ask each other a no holds barred personal question without fear of repercussion makes it fun too. And fourthly, not needing to proselytize, but letting a brother see Jesus in you. And now I'm going to close my section with this poem, For Longing. Blessed be the longing that brought you here and quickens your soul with wonder. May you have the courage to listen to the voice of desire that disturbs you when you have settled for something safe. May you have the wisdom to enter generously into your own unease, to discover the new direction your longing wants you to take. May the forms of belonging in love and creativity and friendship. And I'm sorry I can't read the rest on my screen. That's John O'Donohue anyway. So, all right, my brother Alex will give us concrete ways to do all those things and more to investigate who we are and how to form community around that. So take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Paul has done a really good job of setting me up for talking about some of the opportunities that we have available to folks through those Disciples Men, Office of Disciples Men at Disciples Home Missions. And the major resource that Greg and I have been responsible for creating over these past couple of years, we started creating this resource and these resources in 2019 and continued throughout 2020 and into the beginning of this year. We've continued adding to the stable of resources that are available. And they are all being produced under what we call the Jesus Way. And this is a new journey for men, journey of spirituality and discipleship. And so these resources are based heavily in what Paul was talking about with those 4 archetypes, and moving from what we call the immature masculine to a more mature masculine expression, a masculine expression that embraces others, that serves in the world. We talk about servant leadership, some in there as well. And one of the key markers of this, where I think it is particularly important for our discussion this evening, is that when we are on these journeys, men have a innate need to have life-giving relationships with other men, to have men who are willing to walk alongside them and guide them through this journey, to have a wise elder, a spiritual elder who is willing to come alongside and provide a safe space where everybody is welcome to bring who they are. At that point, there's no judgment. And then we can work to walk together and develop ourselves. Develop ourselves as men. One of the important things, and I think it's come up in both Jan's presentation and Paul's, is the importance of sharing stories. Many years ago now, it's been over a decade, there was a study done, and it asked men, primarily younger men, what they most desired in life. And this was a study that was not necessarily religious in nature. They were just asking the question, as a young man, what do you most want in life? And the answer was they wanted an older man to talk with and share stories with that would have a non-judgmental, safe space for them, that would hold that space sacred. And what I have found through my life and aging is that I really I flourish when I surround myself with other people who are willing to support me, hold me accountable, and help me grow and mature. So in the Jesus Way journey, there's this opportunity for older men to provide that spiritual guidance and perspective. The world isn't what it once was. Their experiences, the 80, 90-year-old gentlemen that I know, their experiences at my age are different than mine. But they still have a lot to tell me about some of those journeys and what they were like. And they can offer me great support and fellowship. At the same time, as we age, it's important for us to remember that we can learn down. We can learn from those younger men, learn from what they're experiencing in their lives now. Several years ago, there was a suggestion that if you were over 45, you were encouraged to make sure that you had a mentor. And yes, I said mentor, who was under 30, to keep you connected to that vibrant seekingness of youth. And so that has been an important part of my life for several years. I have some young mentors that keep me connected with things, especially been important for me as my kids have grown up and moved away from home. I don't have their resources anymore. So I've reached out to some colleagues and had them help guide me in that process. Another transition that we make is if we are forming well as men in our first half of life, we are figuring out who we are as individuals. And I think it's important that in our second half of life, we're thinking about that bigger question for me, which is, who are we as community? Who are we related to one another and related to God? And older men in our congregations have lots of opportunities, lots of wisdom and experience to share with who we are as communities. I'm reminded of my early years in ministry, where I went to a Monday morning men's breakfast. And every Monday we would gather at the church and we'd have biscuits and gravy, ham, bacon, sausage, all good, heart attack inducing kinds of foods. That was the first experience that I'd had red-eye gravy. But it was an opportunity for primarily, the group was made up of primarily older men, but it was an opportunity for those of us who were younger to soak up the wisdom, to hear the stories. I heard amazing stories of some of these men's experiences during World War II and later conflicts. Heard their experiences on the farms and at work, and not all happy, laughter-inducing experiences. Some of these were full of grief and pain and anguish, and we held that together. And it was a beautiful, beautiful experience to be able to hold those safe spaces where we could share. And so that's one of the things that I think is important for us as men in the church, is creating those safe spaces where we can discover who we are as individuals, who we are as community, and we can grow throughout our lives ever more into who God calls us to be, how God calls us to interact and support the coming of God's kingdom here on earth throughout our lives. So there's some really beautiful opportunities there. The Jesus Way Journey has 3 sections available now, and you can find those through that website there. I'll give you another one. I'll put this in the chat here in just a moment. Both Greg and I recently worked with a group called Project 12, and we've done that group has done another series of men's studies that are, like Paul said, they're intended to be used in places that are not the church. To gather a group of men, maybe who don't have any church experience or church background, but to gather a group of men, maybe at a bar or a deli, and to have some really deep conversations. So that is also available. Like I said, I'll put the website for that in the chat here in just a few moments.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And notice we call this Q&R, it means questions and response, because I don't think any of us have the answers to these complex things, but together I think we might have a modicum of wisdom. So Jan will lead us into this section here.
Yes, and I'm happy to moderate this section while you're thinking of what your comment should be or could be, or a question that you might have, or something that you would like to dig a little bit deeper with. Those are the kinds of things we're encouraging you to do with us. You can verbalize that or write it in the chat. But I will remind you just quickly also that we would like your email address if we don't have it already, so that we can send a follow-up to you, which includes a listing of resources that we've not yet been able to speak about specifically, some additional material that might be helpful to you that you would like to have. So we're looking for that as well. We have plenty of time here for lots of comments and questions and going a little bit further. So I'd encourage you to think, first of all, maybe if nothing else pops to your mind, who has been a mentor to you? And while you're thinking about that person, let me share a story. I came across in an email just last week from a friend, and it was so apropos. I thought I have to bring it to this gathering tonight. A clergy friend of mine works in a college setting, a university setting, and he told the fact that he had been approached by a young man who serves in the US Navy, asking for a conversation on theology. He had been at the college university, and now being in the Navy, he was hungry for this information and seeking a mentor from an older person. So they started this conversation virtually because he was often at sea. Well, that conversation continues now, 10 years later, and the two of them have just met in person for the very first time. So, what a rich example of mentoring and sharing back and forth between these two men. And the knowledge, the growth that they've had together is pretty incredible. Your turn. Who would like to pose
Yeah.
something?
We had a question expressed in the chat, and perhaps this will answer a mentor example, but we're asked to describe the value of ritual or our experience of ritual. And one response to that is that I remember Joseph Campbell saying directly that it's through ritual is the only way that we can learn. We can read all we want to or study all we want to, but unless our heart is enriched by what actually the church does very well, the learning is not going to be great. And when you think about your mentors, and Alex, I'm sorry, I saw you were ready to jump in about
No,
your
you're-
mentor, but
you're
I'll
good.
transition with my mentor story that has to do
Yeah.
with ritual. For that, it's was the man who actually inspired to bring me into ministry, and I was just a young punk in my early 20s. Disciples pastor who took me under his wing and did not have to say anything. Just looked at me in my eyes, and just stood there in silence and put his arms on my shoulder. And that's a ritual. It was simple, but it was profound enough that communicated that I could see that he wanted to pass on his almost 80 years of wisdom at that point on to me. It was a laying on of hands, if you will. And so I had no choice but to pursue this vocation, and perhaps somebody will let me grab them to pass on. Go ahead, Alex.
I was thinking, Paul, of a similar type experience, and for me, it was a group of men that gathered for coffee and donuts. I believe it was a Tuesday morning. I was not yet in ministry. I'd been called to ministry years before, but was denying that call at this point. I was working at a radio station, and it was a group of men from the church who all happened to be 10, 15, 20 years my senior. And we gathered, and through the ritual part was every week we asked one another the same set of questions. Basically, where have you seen God in this past week? Where have you had stumbling blocks in your past week? Where have you succeeded or felt even closer to God in the past week? And so based on questions similar to that, we would meet on Tuesday mornings, like I said, and share coffee and donuts and conversation. And for about an hour, that was life-giving, because it was that safe space. It was an ability to talk about whatever was going on in our lives, and that ritual of keeping us grounded in our faith and reliance on God. That morphed later in my life once I was in ministry to another Tuesday morning group. Tuesdays seemed to be the day for me. And it was a meeting with other clergy here in town. And we met for almost 14 years before we've all started to get different jobs or pass on. And same kind of thing. We would share life, share what was going on in our lives, and then a time of prayer. And that ritual, that aspect, really served to draw us together and to draw us closer to God.
Mhm.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Frank, for those resources. I
Yeah.
remember Tuesdays with Morrie. Do you remember that Mitch Albom book? Just absolutely perfect example of what we're talking about. So
Yeah.
who else wants to share a story?
I agree with Jack. The face of that 100-year-old man had a lot of life stories in it. He just kind of glowed. You can kind of get that sense,
Yeah.
that sense of there was some depth there. I've been fortunate enough to have a gentleman in my congregation whom I've known now for 15 years. He's just turned 95. And the wisdom that he contains, and just a gentle spirit. If I can age and be half as kind and loving and yet strong as Frank is when I'm 95, I will have won the lottery.
This is Jack. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I don't know if this will break up, but there was a time after Men's Rites of Passage that I traveled with Paul Koch, and we shared much together during the rituals that we went through. But I had left that rites of passage with one more need, and that was to be able to forgive myself for past experiences as a veteran in Vietnam. Paul said, well, you really need to dismiss that loyal soldier. And there's two men on this call right now that took me through that experience and designed a ceremony, a ritual. And it was just life-giving. And I won't go into the depth of what it did, but it allowed me to look at myself and to acknowledge that soldier, and to dismiss that soldier, even though that soldier can advise me. Yeah, that soldier can no longer control me. Mm-hmm. And much of this comes out of Bill Plotkin's writings and so on and so forth. But it was because I was walking with a brother during a ritual that brother was able to voice that need that I had and allow me to go through dismissing my loyal soldier. Literally, it was a loyal soldier. Oh.
Mm. Thank you, Jack, for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes.
I would like to say something. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. This is Eric, and I am part of Illumin, but I just want to make a comment on ritual. I've experienced ritual within a church setting, outside of a church setting, and I think ritual is so important, because all the different things involved in ritual typically affects all our five senses. And it just opens us up to, hearing or feeling or wanting to absorb in all those different ways through our senses what's going on. It breaks down barriers. And I just think ritual is so important from the sense of smell. If it's incense in a church, or it's sage, men's music, whether it's flutes or drums or other music, whether it's the feel of touch and hugging another man, or if it's watching what's going on, like Jack just mentioned, going through his loyal soldier. It's all those things together that just open the senses. And when men can do that, that is huge. Because like was said before, it is much easier for women to they're wired differently, and they're more social animals, they're more relationship, and we've been trained not to be like that as much. But for us to do that is huge, and ritual really adds a lot to enabling that to happen.
Yeah, thank you. That's one that you touched on something, Eric and Jan did earlier, that I'm not sure of yet. I'm still thinking about this one, but I'm wondering if the younger generations of men, I'm pretty firmly in the middle of Gen X, just about to turn 50 here in a year or two. Um, I'm wondering if the generations younger than me, so we're talking your Gen Zs or millennials or Gen Alphas, seem to be, even the men in there seem to be a little more connected, a little more willing to share, more in touch with their feelings maybe than at least I was when I was growing up. You know, I was taught that stoic kind of masculinity, as many my age were. So I'm wondering, kind of wondering out loud with you all here. I'm wondering if we're not going to see a continued transition in what this looks like over the next 20 or so years, when as we continue to move through these generations. I'm excited by some of the opportunities I think we have, to really learn from younger folks who are more in touch with those, all those senses, those emotions that you were talking about, Eric.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Alex. And if I could be so bold, it's because they were raised, the younger generations were raised by men like Eric and Jack and you and Fred and me, perhaps. Just that, you know, we are passing it on. We are going forward. So I remember a dialogue of men my age and a little bit older asking about their relationships with their father, and it was night and day difference for what their younger men experiencing. You know, God bless, you know, the men who had to suffer, you know, in the factories and in the mines and all that society says, this is your trap, you're going to be a production machine. And I think we're evolving to a better place. So we have a couple minutes. Frank and Fred, anything that you'd care to share before we wrap up?
Actually, for me, okay, the ritual have a certain meaning, but unless I know the meaning, for me, it's not a major concern. My major concern is the substance. Okay, I don't know what's happened in your church, but every church I go through, I think women probably 90%, men is only 10%. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons, this is what I'm thinking, is because a lot of teaching in the church is not useful, because it's not like a man wants something substance, okay? So if you give him a nice flowery stuff here, when he eat it, he still feel hungry, right? But if you give him a steak, right, then we are talking, you know? So I guess a man hate to wasting time. Men always said, what else can I contribute? And women said, okay, how can I relate? Maybe that's a major difference. So in the church, if only talking about relationship, that's why women over there, they are talking about relationship. But, but there's no actually application about a Bible verse. So if I said, you know, if all the women, okay, could said, you know, no complaint, just simple that one, okay, then all the men would be very happy, yeah, because it would be like a happy camper, because the Bible tells us that let no evil word come out from your mouth, right? And then, you know, when you talk, make sure you edify the others. So just these two words, if we just bring to all the ladies, I guess that will bring all the men to the church, because they show this glowing of Christ in women. But the problem here, after go home, and the women complain, said, "Hey, you are not as good as other people's husband," right? They start to compare. They violate the 10th commandment, the 10th one. Come with other, okay? So men get very upset about the stuff here, because they complain, they compare, okay? And this is what happened here, okay? Now, if you just train women, just these two simple ones, you know, I don't know how long going to take it, 10 minutes, you get done, okay? Right? But then you're talking about what is a complaint, right? Okay, the complaint is, like I said, okay, you know, you are not doing a good job. This is a complaint. But if you move this chair to the table, then it's useful. Man can do it. Man is a doer. So if you just make something there, when you say something that is not a complaint, then it comes what else man can do. So church, unless they switch from that kind of mentality, man gonna away from the church because it's useful. Or I listen to just all the relationship, and it's not, for example, how could you make my business more prosper, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that goes back to the who asks for a loaf of bread and you'll give them a stone instead. So instead, so yeah, we're past our hour that we asked you to join, and I thank you for everybody who participated. And let me screen share again because Jan has one last slide.
It's just a closing slide that has a comment on it that might be helpful in sending us on our way, Paul.
Oh, absolutely. Through soul work, the second half of life is initiated and the journey to the true self starts. It is a journey to make sense of the meaning of life. So whether it's in your circle or your church or your home, or with the guy that you happen to sit next to on the bench, let's name that soul work, and we'll be there. So thank you all for being with us tonight. Jan, for putting great context, understanding who we are.
Thank you, Paul.
So
Thank you.
blessings.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.